Oh, hey, I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to the Efficiency Bitch podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Leone. This podcast is dedicated to all the women out there who are aspiring to have a career while raising a family. And bitch? Well, that's more than a name and even an attitude. We use it as an acronym. It's for bank, inbox, time, connection, and harmony. Each episode is labeled according to the correct topic so that you can efficiently find the topic that you're looking for. I'm here to tell you, you can have your cake and eat it too. The trick is finding efficient ways to get through the have-tos so that you can make room for your best life. I can show you how. Let's get started. Hey, welcome to the Efficiency Bitch podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Leone. If you've been around a while, welcome back. If you're new here, welcome to the Beehive. Super glad you came. So if you've been around, you know we do a BITCH format. B is for bank. And today we're going to talk money. We're going to talk bank. I have an excellent expert here today. You've probably heard me talk before about my concepts of four pockets, right? The front pocket being money that you spend, the other front pocket being your short-term savings, emergency fund. Your back two pockets are all about investments. And so we're going to talk about investments today, how to leverage them, how to understand them, how to teach them so that your children understand. So Tess, hi, welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you for having me, Melissa. I'm so excited to be here, not just because I love the pocket example. I've never thought about it that way, and I love that. So I'm going to use that if that's okay.
Yeah.
But I also love the name of your podcast, not just because of the clever acronym, but because I was a VP of operations for a long time. So I literally am an efficiency bitch. Like, I wish that could have been my title.
Okay, well, we're now making t-shirts and hats. So
where do I sign?
Look it up.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's funny. I get that a lot. Like, that's me. I am an efficiency bitch. And the story originated, I called my mom an efficiency bitch when I was a young person. I think I was 18. I was home from college for the first time and she was having a party. And I said, well, you don't have to be an efficiency bitch. And then it just kind of became a love language. So, the writing the book and the podcast has all been really fun for me because it's a tip to my mom the whole time. Yeah.
I love that.
So Tess, tell us who you are, where you come from, and how you do life.
Sure. So my name is Tess. I own a business called Wealth with Tess, which is a financial education platform for women to help you grow your money using very simple investing strategies, simple being the key word. And a little bit about my story, how I got here is I first of all grew up very afraid of money. I have a lot of negative stories, a lot of toxic relationship with money, was always afraid we wouldn't have enough. Mm-hmm. And then in my mid-20s, when I graduated from college and I couldn't find a job, it was 2010. So I got rejected from every job. Yep. There was a recession back then. I ended up in the weirdest job of all time as an aerial acrobat on cruise ships. That was my first job.
Yes.
And yes. And so while it wasn't the high paying corporate job that I wanted, what it did allow me to do was save a lot of money because I didn't have to pay for anything. I lived on the cruise ship, which was weird. That's a different type of podcast. So anyway, I ended up saving a lot of money and was very afraid to lose it, to mess it up. So for a while I hoarded it all. And then I thought, I knew enough to know that investing is the thing that I need to do. Mm-hmm. So I found a financial advisor, gave them my money, turned the other way and kind of just said, like, make it be more. And unfortunately, what I didn't understand was not just how the financial advisor was compensated. Some of the products they had put me in were not a good fit for me. And this was somebody that was a fiduciary, and a fiduciary, for those of you that don't know, is somebody held to a standard to act in your best interest legally. And so unfortunately, I thought I had done all my due diligence and I ended up losing tens of thousands of dollars between that and another bad real estate investment. So in my mid-20s, I was about down $80,000 in bad investment choices. And once I started to recover from my shame spiral and lots of tears, mm-hmm. I ended up getting really interested in investing, talking to everybody I could. I read every single book about it. And what I discovered was that this thing that I had built up in my mind as so complex and so confusing was actually pretty straightforward. It was just filled with jargon and acronyms and finance bro language that makes it feel scary, especially for women, because there's not as many women talking about this.
Did you say finance bro?
Yeah, finance bro.
I love it. That's so what it is.
That's exactly what it is. It's like mansplaining, but specifically for finance. Mm-hmm. And so after all that, I felt honestly morally compelled to teach as many women as possible, because I was like, wait a minute, if we explain this in a way that's digestible and speaks to women, then it's not so complicated. And so now I own a business, Wealth with Tess. I do small group coaching programs, teaching the basics of investing and helping women learn how to invest on their own, or at least be educated enough to understand what's going on with their investments if someone else is managing it for them.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think it got so complicated? Like, where did this all come from? Why did it become something that everybody's so afraid of?
It's such a huge question. Well, there's so much to say about how you grow up, right? Money's so complicated. So however your parents had a relationship with money, that's either going to impact you directly, like you might have the same relationship with money, or you might rebel. Like if your parents were very stingy, you might spend a lot of money. So, psychology is complex, and money psychology is a whole topic in itself. There's actually people that have PhDs in this. So it's a very, very interesting topic. I love nerding out on it. So there's that piece, the limiting beliefs. And then as women, just feeling like it's greedy to want money, that we should, be very generous as women, like that's in our DNA. And so I think there's some of that. So there's the limiting beliefs piece. And then there's the myths perpetuated by the industry itself. So there's those two pieces. So that's why it's so complex, because it's your relationship plus what you're hearing all the time. So what I always say when I do workshops or I'm on podcasts or anything like that is, as you start to go through your money journey, and I hope this podcast and Melissa's podcast in general is inspiring you to do that, give yourself grace, because you're going to learn a lot of stuff about yourself that seems obvious or just seems like you're like, how did I believe that for so long? That doesn't serve me anymore. Or even information about the stock market that is relatively simple, but it seems so complicated. And this is just such a big topic that it's okay. So like, give yourself some grace as you're going through your financial journey. And so besides the limiting beliefs, feeling guilty about being greedy, not feeling like we deserve it, it's unfamiliar. We don't learn it in school. We don't learn it in high school. We don't learn it in college. I took intro to jazz in college, which was like cool, but like I would have rather learned how to do the stock market. And then on top of it, the language in the media. I read recently the stat that over 60% of articles written for women about finances are about saving money, are about women tending to be excessive spending. That's not only not true, it's gaslighting women. So we're getting a lot of that messaging all the time. So it's an uphill battle.
Yeah.
And then you've got all the acronyms and the words. And so there's so many reasons. But at the end of the day, what I'm excited to share more is how it doesn't have to be that complicated, but it's okay if it feels complicated.
I love that. I was on a 5-day financial freedom challenge. I was a speaker at this challenge this morning.
I saw that.
Yeah. And we were talking about money, and I use an analogy about driving a car. When you're thinking about your money, you have to look way in front of you. You have to know where you're going. You have to kind of look side to side, and you have to look behind you. And it also came up that when you first start to learn to drive a car, when you're 15 or 16, it sucks. Everything's hard. You don't know how hard to push the gas or how hard to hit the brake, and you fly forward and you forget to use your turn signal. But then after a couple of years, it is autopilot and you're super good at it. So I like that you mentioned it's hard at first. You just have to kind of get through some of those growing pains and move through it, because learning to drive a car is hard and learning to manage money is hard, but it will get better and you will be very soon on autopilot and know how to do it. So what are some ways that you're ready to invest? How do you know that it's time to figure this out?
Sure. So there's a couple things that, to your analogy of the different pockets, right? Your front pockets being saving, your back pockets being investing. There's a couple things you want to make sure that you have a good foundation sorted for before you start investing. So the first one is making sure you have an emergency fund, which is, depending on your lifestyle, 3 to 6 months of expenses. That's a general rule. I would say if you're a business owner, maybe it's longer because you don't know what it's going to look like. If you have more money in retirement, it could be less, but 3 to 6 months is the general rule of thumb. I will also add that if you don't have a high yield savings account right now, I want you to write a note to yourself to Google that and open one, because high yield savings accounts are right now, at the time of this podcast, which is August 20 or probably September 2023, we have an incredible opportunity to make money doing within safe savings account, which that's what a high yield savings account is. So making no assumptions, it's really just a savings account that's online, that doesn't have brick and mortar locations. They're just as safe, and they have way higher returns on your money, and it's not invested. It's just a savings account. So the rates right now are about 5% in your bank. You're getting 0.02, I don't know, like a penny, maybe. So not a lot. So that's the first thing I want to say. The other thing that you want to make sure is that you've paid off all your high interest debt. That's typically anything over 6 or 7%. But this is one of those investing myths where people think, oh, I have to be like debt free to start investing. That's actually not true. What you do need is to make sure you pay off high interest debt over 6 or 7%. That's going to be credit cards. But if you have a mortgage, if you're lucky enough to have a house at a low mortgage rate, or student loans under 6%, paying those off faster feels good psychologically because you're probably going to save money in interest. But if you're taking the opportunity to invest that money instead, you're actually likelier to grow your net worth faster. So it's worth doing the math. And I did this with a client of mine in my small group coaching the other day. She was contributing an extra $500 to her mortgage payment every month. The interest rate was very low. I think it was like 3 or 4%. And so we did the math. And if she invested that money over the next 10 years, she'd end up with, I can't remember the exact number, over $100,000. And then if she used that money to pay down her mortgage faster, she ended up saving a few years of interest, but maybe saving like 20 or 30K in interest. So a huge difference in her net worth, right? So she stopped doing that and now she's investing in the stock market. And the reason for that is because the average return of the stock market is roughly 10%. I usually use 8 to subtract for inflation.
And this is the thing where like generational knowledge is so important, because I've heard that suggestion by parents and grandparents and Dave Ramsey's and the people like this, but they're talking about a generation where their mortgage rates were 20%, 18%. So it is a very different thought process. We call our interest rates high right now, but really they're still not that high. They're just higher than they were.
Yeah, totally. It's actually at the time of this recording, they're 7.5%. That's like dead center of the historical average. Like they're not actually that high. So yeah, it is important to seek out multiple opinions on these things, because if you do follow someone like Dave Ramsey, he's got a lot of really smart things to say, but some of his advice might not make sense for you. So important to get multiple views on anything you hear.
It's so interesting how many people's opinions I get about Dave Ramsey. He comes up a lot, right? Because he's everywhere and he's been around for a really long time. And most people in our age group have the same kind of thing to say. He's got some smart things, but he's also like maybe not completely speaking to your current situation. I think he does a phenomenal job of getting people out of debt, but he does not do a good job of helping you build wealth for the future. And maybe some of his things are a little antiquated.
Yeah, I think there's that. And there's also the one thing that, I don't have super strong opinions. I haven't ever done one of his coaching programs. But one thing I've heard from people that have is that there's a lot of scarcity mindset where if you have any debt at all, you shouldn't go out to eat, you shouldn't enjoy your life. And I think that's really dangerous because, yes, of course, if you are in a place where you need to get control of your spending, you need to do that. But there are ways to do it thoughtfully where you can still enjoy your life and do things that bring you value and spend time with your family, whatever it is. So I think that advice is a little bit antiquated too. So that's another reason why it's so great to get on your financial journey too, because once you figure out what's important to you and what you value, it's much easier to spend money and not feel guilty or weird about it. So I also kind of disagree with him on that.
Yeah, me too. I do too. So let's talk about some of the simplest ways, some simple strategies that you can go into investments if you're new to the game, or how to learn about it.
Sure. So as we've just talked about some of the prerequisites, as long as you've paid off your high interest debt and as long as you have an emergency savings, you can start investing. The third step before you start is getting a basic education. And what you want to learn, there's a couple pieces. One is to figure out how much money you have available to invest. And so that does involve some kind of budgeting process, but it doesn't have to be a lot. I'll stress that again. Even starting with $100, $200 a month can make a huge difference in retirement because of compound interest. So I'll start there. If you're still thinking, I don't know if I'm ready to invest, you probably are. And then getting started, one of the most important things to do is learn about what types of retirement accounts you qualify for. So retirement accounts sound really boring, but they're actually really cool because they help you save a lot of money in taxes, especially if you're a business owner. But for anyone, they can help you save money in taxes. And when your investments grow, they're either tax deferred, meaning you don't have to pay taxes on them until retirement, or you pay tax now and then they grow tax free. So one thing that people get confused about is the relationship between retirement accounts and investing. And at the end of the day, retirement accounts are just containers for your investments that help you save on taxes. So that's the first thing, is you want to figure out what types of retirement accounts are a good fit for you. And for most people, that's more than one. If you have a 401k, looking into an IRA, an individual retirement account, is a great place to start. If you're an entrepreneur, there's tons of different accounts. Definitely talk to your accountant about, somebody like Melissa can help you figure this out, like what retirement accounts are a good fit for you. So that's the first thing. And that's relatively easy to do. It's for most people going to be a Roth IRA or a 401k or some type of SEP IRA if you're a business owner. Mm-hmm. And then the next step is investing. And this is where everyone gets really, really nervous. Like, how do I choose stocks? When do I pick them? What if they go down? We're not going to do any of that. My favorite investing strategy, and this is a strategy that millionaires use. This is a strategy that Warren Buffett, one of the wealthiest investors of all time, wants his wife to use when he passes away, is buying and holding index funds. So an index is a stock market index is basically a list or a group of stocks used to track the performance of the overall stock market. So one example of this that you've probably heard of, if you've ever heard like the S&P's up or the S&P's down and you don't know what that means, what the S&P 500 is just a list, an index. See, this is like the jargon, right? Like you could have just called it a list, but you have to call it an index. So it's a list of the top 500 largest US companies. And so if you want to invest in all of those companies, you can actually do that with one index fund. So it's called an index fund because it invests in a list of stocks. And why that's great is because if you invest in an index fund that holds all the companies in the S&P 500, or even there's index funds that hold all the stocks in the US, what you're doing is you're diversifying and you're giving yourself the opportunity to get the average return of the stock market, which is, historically speaking, 10%. Again, you can subtract inflation if you want, about 8%. So in that strategy, you're buying one box full of tons of different stocks. You don't have to choose them. You don't have to change them. And then you're investing consistently over time in that. And what's nice about this is if you think about it, if you have all these companies in this fund, some of them are going to go up, some of them are going to go down. So you're diversifying your risk. And in something like the S&P 500, you've got all different types of companies. Like if tech is going up, maybe consumer goods are going down, but you don't even have to go that far because index funds have so many different stocks in them that you don't need to learn all the nitty gritty. So
it's a variety pack. So
exactly,
you may get a jelly bean that you like and you may get one that you don't like, versus just picking a bag of the same kind of jelly bean and hating it.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and so instead of trying to put, all your eggs in one basket, that's the best example. And doing this, finding the right one will take you, going back to what we talked about, like getting an education. This takes a couple weeks of effort, not months. Like opening a retirement account, a Roth IRA or a SEP IRA, if you're a business owner, takes 15 minutes. Learning about index funds, if you put your head down and find somebody to help you, find a podcast, take a course, whatever it is, that can take a couple hours for you to understand. So this really doesn't have to be as complicated as people think it is if you take it step by step.
Yeah, I love that. There are so many different pieces of it. And I love how simple you put it, because the index fund is the one that fits most people the best. It doesn't have to be the one, like maybe you don't want the variety pack, but a lot of times it's a really good, easy place to start. I love it.
Yeah. And one thing I'll add is, if you're wondering, well, is that going to be the best returns? Most people that try to stock pick lose money. And most people that try to get really fancy actively managed funds that are constantly trading different stocks, they don't do as well as just holding on to a bunch of different stocks for a long time. And that's true if you talk to any fiduciary advisor that's really good, they'll tell you the same thing. So it doesn't have to be complicated to be effective. There are people I know, millionaire investors, that have 2 to 3 funds in their portfolio and they just leave it alone for decades.
That's excellent. I love that. And do you have to have somebody help you do it, or can you do like self-trade on indexes? How does that work?
Yeah, so you can definitely learn how to do it yourself. And one thing that's important to know is, regardless of how you're wanting to do it, if you're listening to this and thinking like, there's no way I'm going to do it yourself, I'd still recommend getting a basic education, because One, you want to make sure you find somebody that's good, that's qualified, but also you can save a lot of money learning to do it yourself. That's not to say that financial advisors can't be really helpful in helping you plan, but a lot of them do charge a percentage of your assets. So just like your money compounds, the fees that they're charging you also compound. So what I teach people to do is how to do it yourself in very simple ways. So you can save those fees, which can add up to hundreds of thousands of dollars over time. And people don't realize that. And if you do want a financial advisor, maybe later on, maybe you're closer to retirement, there are great certified financial advisors, fiduciaries that charge a flat rate. And that's the kind of one that I would recommend working with, because you know exactly how much you're paying versus a percentage of your money. Because the other problem is, if it's a percentage of your money, if it goes down, you're still paying them, right? So I would rather pay a flat fee for them to help me. But if you're in your 30s and 40s, even early 50s, you can learn to do it yourself. And even if you don't do it for yourself forever, it's so valuable to know how to do it, because you can feel confident if somebody else is doing it. You can teach your kids how to do it. And so there's just so many reasons why you should learn how to do it yourself, even if you don't necessarily do it yourself your whole life. But you probably will, because it's really fun once you learn how to do it.
Well, it was going to be one of my next questions, is how do we start to pass this information down to our children? How do we make sure that they're getting the right education along the way?
I saw this great meme or video the other day of this dad bargaining with marshmallows with his son. And so he gave him, I think he was like, you can have a choice. You can either have this marshmallow now, or you can wait until tomorrow and I'll give you two. And that's how he started teaching him about the power of compounding and being patient and getting more later. And his son's very young, but he is very passionate about the topic. So that's one way, just understanding yourself. First of all, getting educated yourself, right? There's so much power in that. And again, it doesn't, one of the biggest myths too that we haven't really talked about directly is that women are busy. We have a lot going on, kids, work, businesses, whatever it is. So learning this stuff feels like it has to be a huge undertaking. Again, it takes a couple weeks of intentional effort. If you read a couple books or took a course for a few weeks, you would get so much farther than you think. So educating yourself is so important so you can teach your kids, because one of the best ways to build generational wealth, even if you don't have the money for your kids right now to invest, is to teach them how to invest and how small amounts over time are going to compound. If your kid starts investing $200 a month when they're 18, they're going to be a millionaire by the time they're in their 50s. Yeah. And that's it, even if they didn't increase that amount. So explaining that to them and the value of the sooner you start, the less you have to contribute to have more money is really important. The other thing I really like is helping them understand what the stock market actually is, which is you're buying a piece of a company. And so you can do that by picking something they like. So for example, Barbie right now is like a huge deal, right? Mattel is a stock. So if your kid's really into Barbie, that would be a great way to say, hey, like Mattel is doing great because of Barbie. It might not always do great, but like buy them a stock and track it with them. And it's a fun activity and a fun way for them to learn. So I think the more hands-on you can be, the better. And opening up a custodial account for them once they're in their teenage years and they're making money, you can open up an account that you control until they turn a certain age. But tying it back to something they enjoy is probably the best way to get them interested.
Yeah, I agree. In 2019, we bought a Winnebago. We bought a travel trailer. And that Christmas, my father-in-law gave each of my kids, who were 5, 7, and 9 at the time, $500 because he was going to teach them about the stock market. And this was their gift. And he was going to do this with them. And so he asked them each to pick a brand. And my 9-year-old picked Disney, because what 9-year-old wouldn't? Right. And my 7-year-old picked Winnebago. And my father-in-law was like, no, RVs are not recreational vehicles don't make any money. The stock doesn't go anywhere. She was adamant she wanted it. Well, then COVID happened very shortly after. The whole world started buying travel trailers and Disney shut down. And we were all like, well, that's a good lesson, I guess, in that sometimes weird things happen, even though it's not the way that it is. But funny story for us. I don't know that they remember it or understand it, but we'll remind them as they get older, because
it's a great example. Yeah, it's a great example for index funds, right? Like you don't know what's going to happen to these companies, so might as well buy a bunch all at once.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Tess, so tell the audience where they can find you, how they can connect and keep in touch.
Sure. So one of the best resources I want to give you right off the back is I have a Savvy Investor Starter Pack that has a lot of the information that we touched on this episode. It includes a 4-step framework to how to start investing that we just kind of touched on, but in a little more detail. It's totally free, by the way. 3 steps to improve your money mindset. There's even a video in there from one of my paid programs that will walk through big investing mistakes, many of which I made. So I can speak to them pretty well. There's financial calculators, all that jazz. So that is in the Savvy Investor Starter Pack. And that is at www.moneyconfidentcoach.com/savvy. And then hopefully in the show notes, maybe we can drop.
Yep.
Perfect. Okay.
Definitely.
So we'll drop it in there as well. So hit the show notes and grab that. It's totally free. And you'll get a lot of the information a little bit expanded upon of what we talked about today. So that's the best place to go next to get more information. And then I'm also on Instagram at Wealth with Tess as well. And I share a lot of free information there as well.
Awesome. Sounds good. Well, thank you so much for coming. This was absolutely wonderful. And I hope you will go and find Tess on Instagram and check out her really great guide. I'm going to go download it because it sounds very interesting.
Awesome.
And thanks for listening. If you've been around for a while, I'm so glad you came back. If you're new here, make sure you hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss next week's episode. Until then, I'm your host, Melissa Leon. See ya. Well, that wraps it up. Thank you so much for listening. If you're new around here, please be sure to leave us a review on any podcast platform you're listening to. And you can always reach out to me to let me know what topics you're interested in hearing about, or maybe telling me someone you think would be great for the show. Either way, I'd love to hear from you. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram at EfficiencyBee. Until next time, see ya.